We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we record this podcast, the Whadjuk people of Nungabuja. We recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this beautiful place and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded.
Step into the realm of daring ideas and transformative dialogues. This is Voices from the Edge, the podcast that pushes boundaries and ventures beyond the ordinary. Here, we confront the crucial issues that shape our world today. From the heartbeat of community challenges to the untold chronicles of leadership. From the relentless pursuit of social justice to the essential lessons in safety and lifelong learning. Voices from the Edge takes you to the crossroads of change. Because the edge is not just a boundary, it's where growth happens. It's where the real conversations begin. So lean in, be inspired, and let's explore what lies beyond the edge.
And joining us today is the wonderful Andreas Landwehr. Andreas, how are you?
Andreas Landwehr is a German journalist who worked for 30 years as Beijing Bureau Chief and also as head of the Asia-Pacific region for DPA, the German press agency, until 2023. Since 2005, he has been covering G7 and G20 summits, focusing on trade and development issues, climate policy, and Asia. The former U.S. correspondent began reporting from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Mongolia in 1993. In 2011, he received the Liberty Award from the German Reemtsma Foundation for his journalistic work. After serving as regional head for East Asia from 2013, he took responsibility for the entire Asia-Pacific region in 2019. From 2023 to 2024, he joined the political desk in the newsroom in Berlin before leaving DPA after 40 years. He currently works as a China expert, a keynote speaker, and an author for Table Briefings and others. His first encounter with China was during his studies in Taipei, 1980 to 1982, when he also traveled extensively in mainland China. After graduating from Bonn University, he joined DPA in 1984 in Dusseldorf. At DPA headquarters, he worked as a copy editor at the foreign desk and then at the domestic desk during German unification in 1989. As a Washington correspondent from 1990, he specialized in defense policy, covering the Gulf War for the liberation of Kuwait in 1990 and Bill Clinton's first presidential campaign. In 1993, he moved to China with his wife and 3 children to become Beijing Bureau Chief. Since then, he has witnessed China's rise to become the world's second-largest economy. He covered Deng Xiaoping's death, the return of Hong Kong and Macau, China's accession to the WTO, the first outbreak of SARS, the 2008 Olympic Games, Xi Jinping's rise to power since 2012, and the COVID-19 pandemic. He has interviewed various Chinese leaders such as Jiang Zemin, Zhu Rongji, and Wen Jiabao. Since 2001, he has also traveled to North Korea several times.
Yeah.
Fine. Hello.
And where are you joining us from today?
Well, I'm joining you from Berlin, sunny Berlin, a summer day in Berlin.
Good, good. What does the temperature get up to in summer in Berlin?
Oh, it can get up to 35, 38 centigrades.
That's a pretty good temperature. That's a pretty good temperature. Okay, I wouldn't have thought so because we always think of Northern European as cold, but yeah, no, that's comparable to most parts of Australia.
Today would
All
be
right.
28, but yeah, let's see.
Andreas, you've led a fascinating life as a journalist. You've done it for 3+ decades in Beijing, in Germany, in the US. And when I look down all the things that you've actually been part of and that you've reported on, it's quite impressive. It's quite impressive. Before we go into things individually, I'm just really curious. First of all, what made you interested in journalism?
Well, I think it started in school. I mean, we had a school paper, and I worked for the school paper, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, I mean, when you're young, you have no idea really how journalism works, but it has a certain fascination. And then I studied Chinese. I was quite interested in China, or actually I maybe was more interested in, going far away or seeing the world. So I ended up studying Chinese, and then I went to Taiwan to study there for 2 years and finished university. And then first I started in business and made an kind of an intern program to become a businessman, but I didn't really enjoy that. And I kept on writing applications to media companies. And then finally, I got the chance to work for DPA, the German press agency.
Good, good. Now, there's so many things I want to pick your brain about. First of all, reunification of Germany. You were there. How momentous was that? How big was that in Germany itself?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, it was really huge. Every day was a day in history. And I was working at the DPA headquarters at that time, at the domestic desk, and every day, it was breathtaking, to be honest. I mean, nobody would have expected it. And when finally the wall came down, some people might remember there was a press conference by the Politburo member Schabowski, and he was reading things about travel restrictions being lifted, that East Germans could go to the West, could go to Berlin and to West Germany. And then somebody asked, well, when will it start? And then he looked at his paper and said, I think today. And then, next day, we had, during the night, already everybody came over the border, and it was huge. I mean, it was moving. It was, every day was history. Yeah.
Yeah. And were there many family reunifications? Because I understand, a bit like Korea when it got divided up, we had families on different sides who basically hadn't seen each other for, in some cases, decades. Was there much of that?
Yeah, I think so. Because usually you would have to apply to go, or there's always a process, but you were able to go to East Germany. So and also under certain circumstances, East Germans were able to come to West Germany when they were retired already, or had a special permit. So it was probably not so divided as South and North Korea, or definitely not comparable.
Good.
Yeah.
And were all West Germans happy about reunification with the East?
Well, I think at the time there was a lot of joy on both sides, definitely. And but then, of course, the hard work started, and it was definitely, it was a political unification, but to some East Germans it also felt like a takeover from the West. And probably the West Germans, a lot of them, they looked down upon the East Germans a little bit, and then they went to East Germany and told them how to do things, and that was not, they were not very welcome doing it. Some of them probably also, there was a certain arrogance or certain way that somehow the West Germans felt they have won and the East Germans have lost, or that kind of feeling. And I think that contributed to a lot of resentment. And it's funny, or it's crazy that even after 30 years unification, there is still a divide, or we say a wall in our heads when we think about Germany, and it hasn't really disappeared. It's also, when I live in Berlin now since 2 years, I've never lived in Berlin, and I cannot tell where former East Germany was and West Germany, former East Germany or East Berlin was, and West Berlin ended. But Berliners, original West Berliners, they know exactly where East Germany was, and they still have this in their head. They still, yeah. To me, they are living a bit in the past. I don't see it. I don't care.
Mm. Do you think that the future generation, next generation that'll come through, it won't be as obvious, and it will just be a one homogenized German society?
It's hard to say. I'm definitely not an expert on it, but I even in the younger generation, or when I meet the younger people from East Germany, uh, they still also have this thinking in their head, and it's probably the same true for West Germans, even younger West Germans. I'm not saying that it's for everybody like that, but I've experienced it, that this feeling was somehow probably from the parents or from society, or that it was handed over to the next generation, and this thing doesn't disappear completely.
Okay, good. Um, Now, you mentioned studying Chinese, and that. What was the appeal about China itself?
Yeah, it was. I mean, when you're 20, or you think about what you want to do, or even, I mean, I started when I was 18. I started studying Chinese, and it's more the exotic thing, the adventure, the thing that you might be able to travel the world. And I grew up in a small village with only 4,000 inhabitants, and it was always too small for me, and the next city was too small for me, and then the even bigger city next to it was, I felt, was too small. I wanted to see the world, and that really pushed me. And that at that time, people didn't know much about what was going on in China. It was the end of the Cultural Revolution, or the Cultural Revolution had ended, and a lot of people in the West, or most people in the West, didn't know how brutal and how terrible the Cultural Revolution was, and there was still this thinking among the left that somehow China was at least had an interesting political system where everybody was equal. Communism had a certain appeal at that time, and that was also somehow conveyed to me. And I thought, oh, this sounds great. They have something like a real democracy, or all these stupid ideas. I mean, it was. And that was a little bit behind it. Although I cannot say that I was a leftist. Definitely not. I was at least interested in certain ideas. And during my studies, I also read a lot about Marxism and all these things. But I was never not really political, or not really leftist. But it was more the adventure that brought me to studying in Chinese. And it was, I mean, the universities were crowded, but the Chinese department was a very small department. People knew each other. It was more like in the school, and so it had a nice atmosphere. And yeah, but I have to say, after 2 years, I had the feeling that 2 years studying Chinese in Germany, I had the feeling that I had to go to China. I mean, I couldn't continue studying it without really getting a feeling for the country and the people.
Good. So, when you went to China, was it mainland China you started on, or was it in Taiwan?
I tried to go to Beijing, and I tried to get a scholarship, but I was a bit too early. I would have had to study another year, and I couldn't wait. So I skipped the scholarship, and I worked, and I made some money to go to Taiwan by myself. That was much easier. And during my stay, the 2 years in Taiwan, I also traveled in mainland China, and I got to see the country. And so there was a lot of, yeah, I made
Okay.
a lot of experiences.
There's still a lot of talk in different parts of the world about China, Taiwan, one country, etc., etc. I'm curious because I've never really spoken to too many people who live in Taiwan. What's your personal opinion, do people in Taiwan count themselves as Chinese, as part of mainland China, or have they, since the separation, basically become a separate nation with a separate identity, and they don't think they're ever going to go back to being part of mainland China?
Yeah, that was a big change in the last 40 years. Yeah. When I was studying there from 80 to 82, the mainlanders were pretty much in control in Taiwan, and they looked down upon the Taiwanese, and that has really changed over the decades, especially with the Taiwan becoming a democracy. At that time, Taiwan was still a military dictatorship, and pretty bad, I have to say. But then in the 90s came, they introduced democracy, and it's really, nowadays, it's a vibrant democracy. And with this change, the Taiwanese were also able to have more political participation. And the opposition was mainly driven by Taiwanese and also by the independence movement at that time in the 90s. And finally, then the first opposition candidate, Chen Shui-bian, became president. And somehow that really changed also how the Chinese, the Han Chinese, and the Taiwanese dealt with each other, because suddenly the Taiwanese were in control, and there was a much stronger feeling of being Taiwanese. They identified much stronger with the Taiwanese culture, which was basically suppressed before. I mean, nobody had really asked the Taiwanese what they wanted. They were just they left Japanese colonial rule, and then they had a new, I'm not sure if you can say colonial rule, but they had a Chinese rule, and then they were suppressed by the Han Chinese, by the nationalist Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, and everybody who came over to Taiwan. And so that has really changed. And since then, the Taiwanese, they have their own identity, and few people, or really few people now really identify themselves as being Chinese there. So that's also the major problem, that they have their own identity today.
Okay, good. Now, I'm assuming, because what we hear, that the Chinese government still views Taiwan as fundamentally part of China. What about the average people in China? Do they even care? Is it something they think of as in a nationalist type of sentiment, or is it something that is just so far away from everyday life it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, in China, there is a very strong feeling that Taiwan belongs to China, although Taiwan was never part of the People's Republic. I mean, it was People's Republic was founded in 1949, and Taiwan was a separate entity, and the Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan is also much older than the People's Republic. But there is a strong feeling among people that it belongs to China, and that it's a holy mission to bring it back to China, and even among people who are critical of the Chinese communist system, even they have a similar sentiment.
Now, you also oversaw the returning of Hong Kong to China. Now, that seemed, from the outside, from at least my perspective, it seemed like a fairly smooth, planned transition. Was it?
Yes, definitely. I think it was a smooth transition, and there was a lot of doubt if China would fulfill its promises to the Hong Kong people, and they did for longer than I had expected, to be honest. And but now since Xi Jinping, I have to say, and also we had all these protests in Hong Kong over a long time, and finally Beijing decided to basically take it over and take away the autonomy they had, the freedom they had, the political freedom, the freedom of speech, and they introduced the security laws, and now it's really sad to see what has happened in Hong Kong. It's basically just another Chinese city, I have to say, Chinese mainland city.
Yeah. And round about the time of Tiananmen Square, there was a sentiment. I always thought it was foolish, but anyhow, a sentiment in some parts of the West that the people were going to rise up and somehow have a change of government. What was reporting on that like? Was it highly controlled? Were you able to get access? And was there actually any sentiment besides university students that there was going to be a change in the power structure in China?
I think there was, during the democracy movement, the Tiananmen Square movement, of course, there was a lot of hope that the Chinese system would change, the political system would change, but with cracking down on them and the bloody suppression of this movement, it was clear that this is not going to happen. And I was not there at that time. I came in '93, and the political atmosphere was quite tense at that time, and it was very difficult to talk to dissidents, and it was there was a lot of oppression, and there was, I think, a lot of disappointment also among Chinese people that the system had not changed, and and they didn't see a chance of that it could change in the future.
Yeah. Okay. In the terms of time that you've actually been reporting on China and time you've spent in China, what has changed in terms of access and freedoms for journalists reporting on China?
Yeah, in the 90s, it was there was the openness was there, but of course the political system was still quite tight, and I remember that basically after 2000 there was more openness. It was much easier to talk to professors or experts at university, and of course sometimes they only gave you the party line, but still, if you talk to them, I was always able to learn something, and it really helped me to understand what was going on in China. And it changed basically after Xi Jinping came into power, 2012. And when China was afraid that there also could be a color revolution, it was after the Arab Spring, and there was a lot of anxiety in the system. I think that this could happen in China, and there were calls for Jasmine protests on the internet, which never really happened. But the security system was alarmed that things could go into this direction, and so it really tightened very much the political atmosphere, and it was very getting more difficult to access people. But then there was another push, I would say, in the last 5-6 years, where there was also a lot of fear among sources, a lot of fear among journalists, among professors at universities, even to talk to foreign journalists. I remember once I was reporting on a herd of elephants, wild elephants, that was running around in southern China, somehow losing their original habitat, and it was really an interesting story. And I called up a professor for biology at Beijing University, and he said, "No, this is it's too sensitive. I cannot talk about it. Huh? And I said, well, what is sensitive about elephants running around in southern China? And no, it's too sensitive. He didn't want to talk about it. Basically, it was not the elephants. It was talking to a foreign journalist about something. So he didn't want to talk about it. So this feeling of fear fear getting in touch, having contact, talking to foreign journalists really limited our work in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Now, you also reported on, and I believe you were living in China around about the time COVID kicked off. How scary was that?
Yeah. I mean, we already lived through SARS in 2003, and that was pretty scary. And when I heard the first rumors that something similar was going on in Wuhan, I immediately reported on it. And my first story was out on, I think, December 31st in 2019.
Yep.
And I was alarmed that something like that could happen again, and it did, and it was the same playbook that local authorities didn't want to talk about it, and that only when things could no longer be hidden, or that finally they came out and said what was going on, but a lot of valuable time was lost, many weeks where also other countries maybe could have prepared for that, and even China definitely could have prepared for what was going on. And then in the end of January, of course, there was this strong response, shutting or blocking Wuhan and other cities with millions of people living in. And of course, we were also scared, and the first months were quite difficult to live and in China.
Yeah. All right. Some of the other things I think would have been interesting. You've gone to North Korea several times.
Yes.
How different is North Korea to, I don't know, well, we could say China, but let's say any of the first world countries. Is it just chalk and cheese completely?
It's very different. It's such a controlled place, and it's somehow it's such a crazy place. I have to say, it's the thing is, if you, I remember coming back from North Korea and coming back to Beijing, and I have the feeling, ooh, I'm back in the free world. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I have a different. Sometimes when I traveled from Taiwan to China and I entered, I was at the airport, arrived at the airport, I had the feeling, oh, now I'm back in this tight political system. But coming back from North Korea, Beijing felt like the free world. And it's fascinating what's going on there, I have to say. I mean, for somebody, for a journalist, being there and being able to report and being just having the opportunity to go there. I mean, it's very rare. It's very difficult. You cannot apply just simply for a journalist visa and then go to North Korea. And I was always part of a German parliament group, and who made it possible to have 2 or 3 journalists to travel with them, and we had also a lot of access to people. We talked to a lot of people because they wanted cooperation with Germany, or they definitely wanted German foreign aid, and so we were welcomed there and had access, and so that was were always fascinating trips, I have to say.
Yeah. You also worked as a Washington correspondent. You specialised in defence policy, and you were there when the first Gulf War got underway.
The second one, actually.
The second one for Q8.
Yeah.
That was. How interesting was that? Because for us, it seemed I don't know, for me at least, it seemed another far, far-flung part of the world with very little consequence to Australia, but it didn't stop us from sending specialists over there, shall we say?
Yeah, it was just the beginning when I started being a correspondent, when I moved to Washington, and it, I mean, suddenly Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and Kuwait asked for help from the US, and then George Bush, the old Bush, President Bush, he, as he said, I draw a line until I think it was January 15th, and you move out or we come in. And for me as a young journalist, it was very exciting, and it was the first months after I arrived in Washington, and it was a steep learning curve for me reporting on this, and yeah. That was I have to say, I was impressed by how much the American society was standing behind their troops. And while at the same time, I remember that in Germany, people were very critical of American involvement in this war. But I remember being there and people caring for their troops, for their soldiers' safe return. And that really moved me a lot. And it's a different, maybe it's also the feeling, when I grew up in Germany, and we are not, we are taught, or we are not very patriotic because our Nazi history, the Third Reich history, and we try to live in peace with everybody, and you don't see much soldiers in the streets in Germany, and if somebody decides at that time decided I wanted to become a soldier, people would look and say, you really have to do that. So, and then suddenly coming to the US and seeing this patriotic feelings, this how they support their troops, how they this feeling of leadership in the world, and somehow defending other countries. And maybe, I mean, in this case, Kuwait was not really a democratic society, but still, U.S. decided to go in, probably also because of Kuwait being such an important oil exporter. But on the human side, I mean, it was dangerous for the troops, and this feeling in the U.S. Really moved me at that time.
Yeah, and you were there also covering the first run-in for Bill Clinton before he. I just got to ask you, just on your personal opinion, how charismatic was he?
He was. I thought he was quite charismatic. He also represented a new generation, a hope for change, and I covered him from basically when he was just an unknown governor from Arkansas, and then suddenly winning the election, and that was something that really happened within not even a year. And after the Gulf War, President Bush seemed to be pretty strong. I mean, it seemed that nobody could really beat him. And then Clinton came, and with him came the hope for change in the U.S., for a better system, a system that's looking after the more, let's say, to be a more just society for everybody, not only for the rich. And there was a lot of hope, I have to say. I still remember after the election until his inauguration, all the talks about how the new government would look like, and I mean, he somehow, I was very young at that time, and he really represented something that I would have liked to see as a young person, young generation in the US, a change for the better.
Good. All right, I just want to return to China now, just for a moment. Australia, in particular, we are very dependent on China. It's our largest trading partner. It also has a significant presence in obviously Southeast Asia, but also in the Pacific at the moment, and it's looking to expand that. And we're constantly hearing rumours about China has designs on expanding its presence or becoming a larger military power. First of all, taking Taiwan, and then doing maybe Japan, etc., etc. How realistic is that? Is this just beating the drums of war and building up nationalist sentiment, or is there actual a likelihood that within our lifetimes that we will see China basically be an aggressor in some sort of theatre of war in the South Pacific?
I'm afraid so. I believe very strongly that China wants to take Taiwan by force. And in the past, it felt more like all these exercises there, the maneuvers, they felt like muscle flexing or saber rattling, but that has really changed. The maneuvers that we are seeing now are a preparation for an invasion and a preparation for a sea blockade or a preparation for what the Taiwanese call quarantine measures. That means that the Chinese Coast Guard would inspect ships going to Taiwan, exercising sovereignty and enforcing the law, so-called enforcing the law, and that ships need permission to move on to Taiwan, which already would start a crisis. So this is quarantine. The other thing would be a complete sea blockade of Taiwan. But a sea blockade would be a preparation definitely for an invasion, or would go hand in hand with an invasion. I'm really worried about it. In my 30 years in China, for a long time, I thought this is not going to happen in our lifetime. But now I'm really worried that it could happen within years, I have to say.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you mentioned the naval buildup. China now has, by numbers, the biggest naval force in the world. They just had maneuvers for the first time with 2 aircraft carrier groups outside the first island chain. The first island chain is a strategic line between Japan, Taiwan, down to the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan is an important part of that. And it shows that they can project force into the Pacific. You have experienced that in Australia just recently when they suddenly had maneuvers there and impacting the civil aviation also. And so this is all preparation, and all this maneuvers are no longer just training for some possibility or being ready. It's more like a dress rehearsal, what's going
Yeah.
on. A dress rehearsal for taking over Taiwan by force. And I'm also afraid that we in Germany and other countries, we are not really prepared for that.
All right. I want to pose a hypothetical for you because, again, I'm asking your opinion, but you're a fairly well-informed opinion. Okay, we've seen Russia with its moves in Crimea and Ukraine, and no one's really come to those countries' aids. We've seen things happening in the Middle East in the last 12 months, and no one's really come to other countries' aids. Is it really likely that we are going to see an escalation of a conflict where China takes Taiwan and the rest of the world actually intervenes? Or do you really think that they will just basically make a lot of noise and then in a year or two it will just be accepted as part of China?
That's the big question. I mean, and it's a question also that we have to ask the US and President Trump. It's very hard to say what he wants to do, what he would do, and today he would say this, and tomorrow he would say something different. So there's a lot of uncertainty about how the U.S. would react, and I think the U.S. are the only power that could really come to the help, could come and help Taiwan defending itself. Uh, Definitely, Japan would be also involved, probably the Philippines, but I think the U.S. is the only force that could really defend Taiwan. And the question is, how fast could they come, and how fast could they decide to help? And at the same time, also China. I mean, there is also the threat of a major escalation, a nuclear escalation between the two powers. China has increased its nuclear weapon arsenal really massively in the last couple of years, and it's continuing to do that. And it's a way to to deter the U.S. from any intervention in this conflict. And very often people ask, yeah, will the U.S. come and help Taiwan? That's, of course, the first question. But then the second question, I think, is a very, very difficult one also, because just imagine a war between the U.S. and China. Imagine the U.S. sinks one of these aircraft carriers, or would fly bomb attacks on Chinese cities, or maybe bomb attacks just on military installations in China. That definitely is a first step for a nuclear escalation between the two powers, and that's a big danger. And we have seen in Ukraine that the U.S. and NATO countries didn't come to the help of Ukraine because they are afraid of a nuclear escalation that Putin is threatening. And so I'm afraid that a similar thing could happen to Taiwan as well.
Yeah. All right. Couple more questions and we might leave it there. First one will be, now I'll just preface this. I went to China only for, I think it was about 2 weeks in 2014. And to be honest, I was expecting this was my poorly informed opinion, semi-agrarian society and not much money in the economy. I got there to Beijing, and you know what it's like in Beijing. It's incredible to see how much money there is flowing around the capital. So that was my misconception. What's some of the biggest myths that still pervade about China in the West?
Yeah, probably that it's a backward country, or that it's a country of farmers, which it actually is. I have to say, because there is a huge gap between the cities and the countryside, and people in the cities are extremely rich. I mean, when I lived in Beijing, and you have seen it, you see, I mean, Rolls Royce and Bugatti and Lamborghini cars, and people spend their money in luxury shops like nothing. So there's a huge wealth among a small group of people, but very visible. And it's a big group, but compared to 1.3 billion people, it's still small, because you have at the same time probably around 600 million people who have to live with, I think it's about like 1,000 yuan per month, which is 140 US dollars, or I think 200 something Australian dollars. So, and this, you can't even rent a room in a medium-sized city to live in for this amount of money. So China is still very poor, but at the same time, it's also very rich, and it's in the cities. The wealth is amazing, and it's a very vibrant society. The middle class you see in the cities, and it's pretty amazing also how they deal with technology. I mean, they digital payment systems. It's crazy how it has developed in China. And even a beggar would have a QR code for you to give him money, and because nobody carries any cash any longer. And so it's, I mean, I have to say one thing. People also ask me very often, why did you spend 30 years in China? And my answer to that is the people. It's amazing, Chinese people, the friendliness, the curiosity, the hospitality, and their eagerness to move on and to live a better life for themselves. And of course, they have to deal with a political system which really doesn't allow them to also participate in a political way or even elect their leaders or anything like that. And they have to be careful on what they say. And they're small. I mean, among the families or among friends, people are quite open. And I have to say, as I said at the beginning, in the last couple of years, political situation became more and more tense, and people were more and more afraid also to be very open among friends or among relatives. So that's a very sad change, I have to say.
Yep. All right, last question. What would be the highlight of your career in journalism so far?
I have to say, once I was in a very poor village. I was covering a story. The World Bank had invited us to go to really poor places in southern China, southwest China, in Guangxi, and first we drove by bus and then by a jeep, and then we had to walk, and we came to a small village, and they didn't have electricity there or nothing. Really, really poor people, and the World Bank was trying to help them. And a young farmer really invited me into his small hut. I mean, it was chickens were running around inside, and you could tell, and we knew that they didn't have much to eat there. And he invited me. He gave me bananas to eat and some water to drink, and that kind of hospitality that really moved me. And it was I still remember it as my one of the most important moments during my career as a correspondent in China.
Excellent. Andreas, you've lived a rich and full, and I hope rewarding life as a journalist, and thank you so much for sharing some of it with us today. But for now, we're going to have to leave it there.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Edge. If you like what we are doing, like the episode and the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes, and leave a positive review.